We'll get started at about 40 minutes past the hour. But first today, Dominique Morisseau is a world-renowned playwright who recently received a MacArthur Genius Award. She's also a native of Detroit, whose work has explored many layers of life in the city, past and present, and it dives deep into the swirl of race and class that influences so much of how we think and interact with one another. Morisseau returns to Detroit this week to attend a performance of her stage play Pipeline at the Detroit Public Theater. That play is about a high school teacher in the city, her teenage son, and their fight through an education system that is often working against them. Dominique Morisseau, welcome to Detroit Today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, and welcome home to Detroit. That's important, right?
This is very important.
How often do you find yourself back here?
Because my entire family's here and so is my husband's.
Yeah.
We make it back a couple of times a year.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's a good average, right?
Yeah, no, it's not bad at all. Let's start with Pipeline. What inspired this play, and what do you think people who go to see this play are going to take away from it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can let me answer the first part first, because that second one is always a hilarious question to me. Pipeline. I'm an educator as much as I am an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I started in education. I've been teaching, in education in different cities for over 20 years. So basically, since I was 0.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's right.
Right. And so I just care deeply about young people. And I was really concerned about many things going on with education in this country.
Sure.
And who gets to make the policies around education in this country. And I was also reading Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, at the time.
Yeah.
That I was working on this. And, in that book, she's obviously talking about the incarceration, mass incarceration
Mm-hmm.
issue and that prison industrial complex. But for me, the new Jim Crow is also the education, the world of education, and I just find it just so polarizing. And so the disparity between, the haves and the have-nots in education, it's a big, big deal. And it's divided along racial lines, but also along class lines, and it's scary to me. And so looking into that, and also being very concerned about the school-to-prison pipeline. I mean, those are the things that made me want to write Pipeline.
Yeah. Talk about your own experience with education. You went through Detroit public schools.
Yeah,
that's
right. I'm a former Bates Academy Bates
is that
grad.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So did that influence your thoughts about this much, that experience?
Well, it's so funny because when I was working on this last year in New York, we premiered it at the Lincoln Center in New York City, and then they filmed a version of it for PBS. PBS shot, our show for the camera and for film, and then we did like a distribution of it nationwide recently on the big screen. And when I was talking to people about the play who are not from Detroit, even though the play is not necessarily set in Detroit, it actually probably has more of a tonal quality of my New York teaching days, But I think it feels very inner city wherever you are.
Yeah.
And for me, when people would ask me about education, they would talk to me about, my upbringing. I was like, I went to, the name of my elementary school was Bates Academy, School for the Gifted and Talented.
Right.
Right? And I was like, that's basically just, you're asking us to get beat up everywhere we go. You're just basically
like
putting it on
stop,
us.
Right?
And even though I love my school, and it was really an amazing education, and we had amazing educators.
Yeah.
At our school, I do think that there is something a little concerning with titling schools like for gifted and talented when every school doesn't have that. Then it creates a division in our minds around us and the kids that go to their neighborhood schools. When you have to get bused to a school, there's just a different mentality that goes along with that. And so I think that it already means that some young people will not feel as their education is as specialized, as others. And that's concerning to me as an educator.
Yeah. Pipeline, the title obviously refers to this idea of schools being that first step that people take, especially young African Americans, especially young African American boys, into that criminal justice industrial complex.
Yeah.
Do you this gets to that second question I asked, the message that you're trying to get across here to people, that you want people to take away from it. Is it really that concrete, that what we're doing in public schools is setting people up to be involved in the criminal justice system?
No, not that directly. And why I say that is because Pipeline is actually a play about a mother, Naya, who's she's a public school teacher, but her son, Omari, goes to a private school. And there's actually an incident that happens at his private school that sets him on the track for they might be pressing, for expulsion and potentially criminal charges being pressed against him. Yeah. And so what we're looking at through her world is her world as an educator in the public school, and her passionate teacher, I call her a master educator, and how she navigates the public school spaces, and how her son, is navigating the private school spaces. And so it's looking at, I would say, one of my director in New York, Liliana Blaine Cruz, she would always say that this is about two things. It's about failure of education, both systemically, and, how we can look at, I think in the public school, we're looking at systemic failure often, you know. But in private school, we never talk about cultural failure. And that also can impact a young person's ability to thrive and grow in an educational environment. And so those are two things that I think contribute, because no matter where, and it's particularly with young men of color, there's just not many spaces that they can occupy in their full emotionality. Yeah. So if there's anger or justified anger, righteous rage, there's no space for them, and it quickly will turn into criminalizing them, because we expect them to be compartmentalized humans, and this play is also looking at compartmentalized humanity and what happens when we do that to anyone, because it also is a relationship between Omari and his father. That's a pretty devastating relationship in the story, and not because he's an absent deadbeat father. So we're not doing that trope, but there's a lot of other layers, and I think Black masculinity that doesn't get a chance to get explored in story and narrative, but also in society that we're looking at in this story. It's looking at, young people's relationship to each other. There's a scene in the play that I know young people often love, which is between Omari's girlfriend and his mother. So Naya and her son's girlfriend. I mean, that's an explosive relationship between, women of different generations and how they perceive each other. So it's a lot of that, I think, when people talk about education and when they talk about, schools failing, they always talk about, in public school capacity particularly, they always talk about teachers failing the kids. Right. And then I go, okay, well, if that's happening, then who's failing the teachers? Right. Because guarantee there's a trickle down. And if you've never taught in a public school, you have no idea the challenges of what that system is like. And I taught in public school. My mother is a public school teacher in Highland Park for 40 years. I taught at Highland Park at Henry Ford Academy. When I first came out of college, I taught there for a full year. And I just think people that don't know what those teachers are up against should never be in a position to dictate the policy for them. Yeah.
This is Detroit Today on 101.9 WDET. I'm Stephen Henderson. My guest is Dominique Morisseau. She's a playwright and 2018 MacArthur Genius Award recipient. She is in Detroit to attend a performance of her own work, Pipeline, produced by the Detroit Public Theater. It opens this evening and runs through November 4th. We're talking about her work. If you want to join the conversation, give us a call, 313-577-1019. Tell us, have you seen some of her work, some of her stage work here in Detroit? A lot of it has played at the Public Theater here in our city. You can also go to the WDET Facebook page and put comments there, or you can go to Twitter and hashtag Detroit Today, and we'll try to work you into the conversation. So Pipeline was off Broadway last year.
That's right.
And your play Ain't Too Proud to Beg, which is about the
just Ain't Too Proud. Yes, everybody calls it Ain't Too Proud to Beg because for obvious reasons. That's the name of the song. Right. I'm like cursing myself, like, why didn't I just call it? We're being clever and calling it Ain't Too Proud, but I know people will call it Ain't Too Proud to Beg for the rest of our lives, and that's something we're gonna have to deal with.
Right. So, you should have just thrown those other two words into the title, right?
It works better for our show. When you see the show, you'll know why it's really called Ain't Too Proud.
Yeah. But that played, is going to play on Broadway next year.
That's right.
Talk about that thrill of seeing your work in that environment, which, I mean, that's sort of, it's a different space than this, but it's the pinnacle, I guess, in theater of where your work can be showcased.
Yeah, it's special. Broadway has been coined the Great White Way for generations, and I think there's been an effort to not make it that, for generations. And so, anytime you get work of this talent that I have in this show, which is we have a cast of 19, predominantly African American cast, on that stage, it's special to be able to be also, an African American woman book writer of a musical. Book writer is just meaning I wrote the script,
right.
like the play, the story to the show, and that's rare in and of itself. To be also from Detroit and to be taking a musical to Broadway, that's the first.
Yeah.
We have other Detroit playwrights who've been Broadway playwrights, but not necessarily with a musical.
Yeah.
And so that's, it's really exciting. And then there's, like I said, I'm in a very, unfortunately, small club of Black women who have been on Broadway as writers and especially writing for musicals. Although that's about to change. I've got some friends coming up with me really soon. Yeah, Katori Hall, who is also, she's a Broadway playwright. And she's a friend of mine, but now she has a Tina Turner musical that's coming to Broadway behind mine. And so, and I know several other women, Lynn Nottage and other friends who are also working on musicals. So that's going to change.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to be a part of that change with this show. It's really exciting, and this show, we're so proud of it. And we're so excited to be able to tell the Temptations story. We have Otis Williams is involved with the show.
Yeah.
And that, for people that don't know, Otis Williams is the last surviving
original,
member
right?
of the original Temps, yes. And I was just with him yesterday, actually.
Yeah.
And he's so excited. He loves our show, and we have his blessing, so that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah. What is it that you think marks that shift, that all of a sudden there's this opportunity for African American women and African Americans to be doing different work than they were able to do on Broadway?
Yeah, I maybe will hesitate to say all of a sudden. I think that there has been a lot of ground that has been covered and been fought, there's a lot of people been pushing for that ground to get broken, throughout the decades. And in some ways there was a gap, like in the 70s when you had like Ntozake Shange and Ron Milner, you had Mickey Grant, you had a lot of people getting breaks on Broadway. And then there seemed to be like a real lull for a while. I think that was like out of perceived progress. Right, then something happens again when we realize, we haven't been.
Right?
Yeah, we slip back, and then now we realize, we're not. I mean, with the nation being what it is, we realize we have not come as far as we thought. Yeah. Obviously, and so I think that's going to be reflected in who's getting voice in not only theater but TV, film, everywhere. You're going to start seeing like an explosion of like, we need to hear from people of color again. Looks like they weren't equal, I mean, it's just like this thing was turns out wasn't ever really post-racial, doggone it.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're kind of seeing.
Yeah. Of course, Lin Manuel and Hamilton, I think really showcased the idea of not just people of color stepping out to the front of the stage, but of course, he wrote it, and you had African American and Latino actors playing parts
Founding
that would,
fathers,
yeah,
that's
right. They're parts that would almost always go to white people. Does that help push things? I mean, the scale of the response to that.
Absolutely. Lin-Manuel is a really good friend of mine as well. We used to teach together.
Is that right?
In New York City, and when his play, his musical In the Heights, I think. Yeah. I remember when I first went to see that on Broadway, to see, it took me a really long time to get in there to see him. And he had actually left the show and come back. And I was like, okay, I'm going to catch you this time. And when I went to see it, that's when I saw like this entire Latinx audience on Broadway.
Yeah.
like really getting their entire lives by seeing themselves on stage. And I thought, oh my God, what a gift he's given them. What a gift this is for, like, I've lived in New York for 15 years plus, and it's rare that you will see a Latinx audience in Broadway. And they, that's a very huge population in that city. So that tells you something about Broadway. And so him doing Hamilton, it just sort of amplified that and upped it a notch, The tricky thing, though, is then you go see Hamilton, you're not seeing a predominantly Latinx audience, you're seeing a predominantly white audience.
I was going to say...
because they're the only people that can afford those tickets.
The tickets were so expensive, right?
Yes. I mean, and then I know it's important to Lynn and his, director, Tommy Kail, who I also know and am good friends with. And it's important to them to have accessible tickets. They're not the sole producers on their show, but they have some really great producers on their show who are also interested in that. So they've done initiatives.
Yeah.
But, it's never going to be enough. But they have done initiatives to try to get people who don't normally get in Broadway houses or, to see Broadway shows to be able to have accessibility.
Sure.
Yeah.
As I said, you're in town to watch Pipeline at the Public Theater.
Yes.
I initially said that it opens tonight. It opened in October 4th.
It opened,
so it's been playing
it
for
opened
a
while ago.
But it runs through November 4th. Talk about seeing your own work on stage. That's got to be a very odd experience, even now.
What's I think unique, every time is because I've seen it. I've been involved in some productions, and with Detroit Public Theater, I'm often involved, at least remotely, in some capacity because I'm an ambassador for that theater, and they've been ambassadors for my work. But I'm not as involved in the process of putting the show up.
Actual production.
Yeah, right? Like, so then I come and I see what people have interpreted that I didn't necessarily, foster directly. And so that's always keeps me on my toes as an artist because, your work is very fragile, I think, and you put it out there and you don't know what people are going to get from it, but you also don't know what people are going to make of it when they get it in their hands.
Right.
And so and my work, Pipeline has a few productions around the country this year. My other play, Skeleton Crew, is one of the most produced plays in the country this year. And so that has a lot of productions that I don't have my hand in, so it gets a little scary, but it's also thrilling.
There's got to be a lot of trust.
There's a lot of
involved
trust.
in letting it go and letting
letting
someone else shape
that's
it.
what you have to do. But what I love about theater, why I'm in this for the win, is because it is a collaborative art form, and it really is about seeing the vision of others. It's about trusting the vision of others or not, but experimenting and dancing with the interpretation of others and like having a collective conversation about the work. And that's what I love. So, as much as it is terrifying, it's also thrilling.
Let's talk about the MacArthur. What was it like to find out you'd won, and how did you find out?
So the how is really interesting because they you don't know that you're being submitted for it or nominated or anything. You have no idea. And so when they call to tell you that you've won it, it's like a random person trying to get in touch with you.
Like lightning strike or something, right?
It's like, and so when a random person tries to get in touch with me, when I'm in a very busy season of my life, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to help make it less difficult because I'm doing so many things. So I actually gave them a hard time to tell
me who is this
that I won
calling
something.
Me, right?
It's ridiculous, but that's what happened. It was someone cryptically was trying to get in touch with me, and I'm like, who is this? I don't know this person.
Yeah.
And why are they acting like it's an emergency? I don't even know them. You know what I mean? Like, I can't respond to this emergency. I'm dealing with my own personal drama today. And so by the time they did get in touch with me, it took like several, like, hey, Dominique, I need you to call
You
me.
really need to call me
You
back.
really need to call me back. And I'm like, okay, everybody says you really need to call them. That doesn't mean anything. And then it got to, Dominique, we're not even supposed to say this, but I'm with a big organization. You really need to call me back. And then I was like, okay, wait, maybe I should.
This is maybe worth looking into.
Maybe worth looking into after they've tried to get in touch with me all day. Something's going on.
Yeah.
And I don't even know them, but they got my number. They got my phone number.
Right.
So
right.
that's like, that got really far. And then when I call, they let you know how we're with this. There's like 3, I think, on the phone. Or I don't know. I felt like I was on a conference call. I don't know who was in that room. I was clowning, and I'm sure they were cracking up at me. But they tell you that you won it, and they tell you that it came. What was really humbling, I think, for me, in the moment of the call, was when they let you know how many people they talk to about your work before they decide to give you that award.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they talked to about 30-something to 40-something people in my field.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
It is.
I mean, that's like that's a very fun birthday party for me. I don't have 100 people birthday parties, and so like 30 to 40 people in my vicinity, that's a lot of people for me. And so for them to have, that's a relationship between me and my peers who are practicing this work, that they suggest to this committee that I am worthy of this award.
Right.
That means a lot to me. That's the people that I practice with,
Right. So it's one of the most interesting awards that you can win, in the sense that it comes with no strings at all.
Yeah.
And the big question always is, well, so what do you do with it? There's a lot of money involved with that award, and I'm always curious what people think they might do. And it's really early, obviously. You may not have reached final decisions about a lot of that, but I'm curious.
I spent that whole 5 years.
Gone.
I got that. That's already spent. It's a lot. It's a lot, and it's over 5 years.
Yeah.
And which is great, because that could just be like a salary to write for 5 years, or it could be, hey, I have a salary. I'm working some jobs right now, so this can be for development ideas. I have a lot of projects that I want to invest in. There's a lot of things I want to do here in Detroit, even though I don't live here anymore. My family lives here, so this will always be home. And I have to, I want to be part of Detroit's restoration and be a part of programs here and property here. So that's one thing, for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's other things. I am an artist. I'm a filmmaker as much as I am a television writer and a playwright.
Right.
And I want to do some of my own initiatives in that capacity. I want to shoot a short film here in Detroit. And I'm working with another Detroit filmmaker. He and I are trying to get together and figure out when we can actually come to Detroit to do this. But so those are some things that I want to invest in.
Is this a work of fiction, nonfiction?
This is a work of fiction.
Yeah.
It's based on a short story that I wrote called Giselle the Gazelle. That looks at a young girl and her relationship to police violence with the young guys around her. And so I want to shoot that here in Detroit, and there's other projects that I want to do here and across the country. So that's I got plans.
Yeah, right. It sounds like you've given it some thought, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about writing and the sort of many different forms that can take as an artistic pursuit. What was it that drew you first to writing for the stage, but then, as you point out, you're doing a lot of other writing as well, for film, for television?
Yeah.
Can you remember what it was that said to you, this is what I want to do?
Well, yes. I mean, as a playwright, I started in college. As a writer, I started in second grade. But as a playwright, I had been a poet. By college, I had been a poet and a fiction writer to myself, I mean, no published works or anything. But I had, been really deeply inspired by Nikki Giovanni and Maya Angelou, as a kid, I was reading a lot of mystery. Judy Blume was also somebody I read a lot as a kid. And Rosa Gee, she's my favorite young adult fiction writer, her and Walter Dean Myers. So I've been reading a lot of their work, and that sort of fed the writer in me, because I think, I went to a poetry event yesterday down at the music hall Aretha Jazz Cafe now. And it was a wonderful poetry slam. And but when I was listening to the poets, I remember being a poet on the scene, and I had always felt of my fellow poets at the time, like, I hope you're reading poetry, because if you're not reading poetry, you're not going to be writing great poetry.
No,
you just
right.
can't write great poetry if you're not reading great poetry. And I think the same thing for any kind of writing. Like, if you're going to be a good, novelist, you need to be reading novels. For me at the time, I had been writing and reading a lot of poetry, so I was becoming a really strong poet. And my poetry transitioned me into playwriting.
Wow.
Into Zaki Shan Gay, I had read her play For Colored Girls. And the long title was For Colored Girls Who've Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Was Enough. And reading her poetry play, she called it a choreo poem, that gave me the, like, oh, I'm a poet. I can write a choreo poem. That was my entry point into writing plays. And it was also because as an actor, I was at the University of Michigan, and I just wasn't getting cast to my liking as an actor. And we weren't studying writers of color ever. And so, like, writers of color and black writers in particular were never mandated in our education. So for me to get exposure to it, it was like I had to go learn it on my own.
You had to go do it on your own.
Which is unfair, and I always tell students now they need to be fighting against that in their programs, because they're paying for their education. They should get the education they want.
Right.
And for me, that meant I was going to write the roles I wanted to be in.
So when you're writing a play, this is something I have zero experience with. I'm always curious, though, do you just write the story first and then add the stage directions and the other sort of physical parts of it being a play, or do you write it as a play from the beginning?
That's a great question. I think everybody has a different way in, and sometimes I take a different way into each play I write. Nowadays, I know what style I want to write in. Like when I was first trying my first play, it was just poetry, so I just started writing poetry, and dialogue, like just words I would hear in my head, and then I went back and would think about who the characters are and would assign them things, right? That's not how I would never do that like that now, because I would be more clear about the voice of character and what I would know who I'm writing about, and my work is a little more linear now, so it's like more traditional storytelling, quote unquote traditional. And so that means, like, if I'm thinking, sometimes it comes to me in the form of a place. When I was writing my play Skeleton Crew about the auto industry in Detroit, I was like, I want to just find a fictional, like, locker room or someplace where people a break room where you can go be in the plant and help, but the plant is around you, so that I could see the characters, but that I could also see a little bit of the world, of the working world around them. My play Detroit 67, I was like, hey, I knew that at the time there were a lot of, like, after hours parties and things like that being raided. And I thought, ooh, a Detroit red light party in the basement. I want to see a play in a basement of Detroit,
Right.
I knew that those were places that I wanted. With Pipeline, location was not the thing. In fact, there's a lot of moments in the play that are described as undefined space, which means that I don't care where they are. This is the idea that they have in their head. So for me, it was more about the issue and the people, and how we're going to find a way to just get to the essence of who these people are and what the issue is that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's all about this one incident that just peppers into everything else. So it comes in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think any writer that really wants to get through a whole story has to have some vision of the end. That'll help you get to the end when you're writing, because you're going to get off course.
Right. So you start with that end in mind.
I do now. I mean, it doesn't mean that I know what the end moment's going to look like. I just know what I'm trying to get to. Like, or for me, I always say I have to know what somebody's willing to fight or die for, and then I can write anything to happen around that, because once I know what you're willing to fight or die for, and that can be as small as something like a piece of cake or as large as your son's life. And if you're willing to fight or die for either one of those things, I can make a lot of interesting obstacles happen for you.
Yeah.
To get to that thing, to get to that fighting for that life, for that life to be saved, or for that cake to be devoured.
Wow.
You know?
How much say are you given in the productions in terms of your original intent with the story and that ending that you're working everyone toward?
Well, when I'm first writing a play, I am the boss.
Right, it's all
Right.
you.
It's all me. I'm the boss. I think when you start getting it into the world of development, you start working on the world of development looks like submitting your play to different development institutions. Sometimes those are theaters, sometimes they're writers' retreats or writers' conferences. Right, but once it hits the world of development, I may be in a room with other writers and we're all listening to each other's work and giving feedback, or I might be in a room with, a bunch of actors and a director, and again, they're giving me feedback on the play, and we're trying to figure things out together about what did I mean when I said that part, and does this really make sense for this character? That's when you start getting other people involved, and I'm still the boss, but I'm not. I can't be so rigid as the boss. I have to be willing to listen to the village to help me hear what my work is doing or not doing, And then I think by the time it gets to full-on production, you are negotiating with a lot of people because you're negotiating with the artistic director of the theater. They're the producer. I mean, they can really say, well, you don't want to take my advice. Goodbye to your play, and the director, we're negotiating like who's the cast, what direction the story's going to take. But the writer in a play world, in the world of theater, the writer is still supposed to be the ultimate authority. I think that there sometimes theaters can be very pushy on writers, especially big prestigious theaters. They can, sort of make a writer feel like they have less agency over their own work. But as a friend of mine says, he used to run Baltimore Center Stage, and now he's running the Young Vic in London. His name is Kwame Kwei Armah. But he says the writer's the only person that can't walk away from the play.
Wow.
So they have to be able to, it has to be able to be something that they can live with. Because they're the only person that can't walk away. Everybody else could be like, well, I did that show, but it was wag, but whatever. I moved on doing other things. But the writer's like the person, that's where it started with them in a quiet place, maybe.
It lives with you forever.
It lives with you forever. So it's like your child. And so, your child's going to go out into the world and you're its mother, but you're not its master. So it is going to get influenced by other people's hand, but at the end of the day, it comes back to mama.
Wow. Last question. Do you see yourself moving back to Detroit at any point? You love the city so much.
I do. I do love the
your
city
work
so
takes
much.
you, to other places. Would this be home again?
I don't know yet. And my husband and I, we just got a home in California, in Los Angeles now. That's where we live. But I'm like, with a new home, like literally not even a year old into that home, we often talk about what would it be like to move back to Detroit. It's not time yet. I'm still now setting ground and doing things in Hollywood. Now I'm becoming a black writer in Hollywood. And so that's got to take its course. But I think I'm not sure, but I know that regardless of whether I'm personally living here, I have to have a stake here. So something of mine will be living here, whether it's an institution or brick and mortar somewhere, but something of mine will be forever in this city.
Wow. Okay. Dominique Morisseau, playwright and 2018 MacArthur Genius Award recipient. Really great to have you here on Detroit Today.
Thank you.
Enjoy the play tonight.
Thank you. I'm excited.